and that all the we're now recording, and all the materials will be sent out after. We've also got captions available on this, so you can find that turn on in the control bar. If you can't, just pop a query in the chat, and Trisha or Rachel will help you. Please stay muted if you're not speaking. To get our attention, write question in the chat box before you put the question in, particularly if things start heating up, and particularly tonight, because we're going to have a brief Q&A that'll allow you to ask questions of Senator Maxman as well. And also use the chat box with balance. We've all been doing that really well, so let's keep that up. Fantastic. Before I switch to the next segment, thank you also to Trisha and Rachel for running the chat room and the tech, particularly the breakout rooms, which is going to be a bit of a challenge later, but I know Rachel's up for that. So, all right. What's next, Olga? Oh, fantastic. We're jumping right in. Okay, good stuff. Senator Maxman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Are you ready for our Q&A, our sort of, yeah, you're smiling. Okay, so we hadn't actually talked much about this beforehand. So I just wanted to clear with you. You have about 20-25 minutes that you could share with us? Okay, great. And maybe we could do this in like sort of an interview sort of format, if that works for you, but also whatever speaking style you prefer is fine with us. If you just want to hold the floor for the next 15 minutes, you could do that too. We're all a little bit shaky about the whole filibuster style, so given what's happened yesterday, but we're going to make an exception in your case if that's what you wanted to do. So Senator Maxman, do you want to just say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's so wonderful to be on here with you tonight. I'm hailing from rural Maine and would love some prompts if you just want to throw out some specific questions.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. So one of the really amazing things about Senator Maxman is, like a lot of our Indivisible groups, folks jumped into politics in 2018. She was a movement organizer before that, and then decided to shift into electoral politics in 2018, very similar to a lot of group leaders in Minnesota anyway. And she won. She won in 2018, and she won in a House district in Maine that we're going to hear a little bit more about. But as a bit of a teaser, she was the first Democrat to ever win that House district ever in the state of Maine. So that's pretty impressive. And then I guess building on that momentum, she then ran in 2020 and flipped the Senate district that she was in, defeating the House minority whip with the GOP. So a pretty impressive run of results there. I got all that from Wikipedia, Chloe. So I hope that's all right. I did verify in a couple other places, Ballotpedia and so forth. So Chloe, what we've done here is we've had 3 sessions, and this is our 4th session of like digging into some of the main components of deep values canvassing. And we've really focused mostly on issue canvassing, not on sort of getting a specific person elected. In the first one, we really dug into empathetic listening. In the second, we dug into storytelling. And in the third, we started to pull all that together with some of the bits and pieces that kind of help provide flow and also allow folks to kind of dig in to the ask on whatever issue that they're canvassing on. And so this group of folks is largely rural. That was the plan when we put this series together, with so many folks wanted to figure out and hear about ways to really move the members of their own communities, particularly in rural spaces. So that seems like a perfect sort of crowd for you. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us maybe a little bit about your decision to run in 2018, and then also what your district is like.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. I have a very energetic puppy running around behind me. I hope she's not going to be too noisy. That's why I keep looking over. But anyway, so as Scott said, I think 2016 was more pivotal in my life than I had recognized in the moment. I'd been doing a lot of movement organizing work around climate justice and divestment. I worked on Bernie Sanders' campaign, and all along I felt like our movements were really powerful, but I could never see myself bringing all that language and those tactics and strategies and messaging back to my hometown. I grew up in a small town of 1,600 folks, and I live in Lincoln County, which is the oldest county in the state, and Maine is the oldest state in the country. Lincoln County is also tied as the most rural county in Maine, and Maine is the most rural state in the country. So some really interesting dynamics happening in here. We're also about a third Democrat, Republican, Independent in Lincoln County, and the Hill identified us as one of the top 10 counties to look at the 2020 elections to really understand kind of where America is at. So when Trump got elected in 2016, I was like, well, I think we were all like, oh no, this is absolutely awful and horrible. But I also realized that, it was in large part the rural vote that got him elected. And I live in a state house district that voted for Trump, and I live in a state senate district that voted for Trump. And so all those facts kind of started making sense to me, that we have awesome organizing on the left that isn't being translated into rural politics or electoral politics. And we have a rural vote that is getting redder and redder. And so there's something missing here. So my answer was to run for office and to kind of create a movement through campaigning. And a huge part of that for us, I did all this work with my best friend, Canyon Woodward. He was my campaign manager for both my campaigns, and had done a lot of electoral stuff before. But we went into both of our campaigns with the explicit intent of campaigning differently. So we didn't use any resources from the state party. I think we maybe in total spent $300 of our budget on resources from the state party, but we did our own mailers, our own palm cards, our own clincher cards. We created our own canvassing universe. We did our own GOTV. We did our own trainings with our volunteers. And we did this because we knew that Democrats only go talk to Democrats when they're campaigning in rural places, and we wanted to do it differently. So I think kind of the nexus that describes our approach to deep canvassing the best is in 2018, running for House District 88, which had never been won by a Democrat before, only 27% Democrats in District 88. Canyon thought I was wacko when I said I wanted to run for state rep, and he looked at the numbers and was like, I don't know if you're gonna win. But we had a primary first, so I started talking to Democrats for the first few months of canvassing, and that was easy. Although stressful at the time, we won with 80% of the vote, and in retrospect, it was a total cakewalk. Then we started to transition into campaigning for the general election. We needed 60% of Republican and independents, as well as 80% of Democrats to win our House district. So when I started canvassing, I myself was only talking to Republicans and independents to kind of build these relationships. And what I began to see, I have the screenshots from my minivan still, is that every day I was talking to people who had literally never been contacted by a Democratic candidate or a Democratic canvasser in their entire voting history. There were also quite a few folks who had never been contacted by the last great attempt at a movement in electoral politics, which was Obama in 2008. So in most cases, I'm talking to people who have never talked to a Democratic candidate or haven't talked to one in over a decade. And at first it was really shocking. I mean, I had conversations with people where they said things that I could not wrap my mind around it. There was one conversation in particular at the beginning of this transition where I was having a great chat with these folks about how you should be able to snowmobile and ATV on public lands, because I'm a snowmobile and I like to go do that. And it's like, I think that's okay, even though some folks on the left don't like that. So we were jiving on that. And then they started to talk about how I don't remember how they transitioned to this particular topic, but they started to talk about how illegal is illegal. And if you do something illegal as a US citizen, you go to jail and you're taken away from your kids. And so if you cross the border and your kids are put into cages, and that's okay because that is the consequence of doing something illegal. And this was, at the time when all of this was happening. And I had no idea how to respond to that, how to talk to folks saying stuff like that to me. I had another conversation where we were talking about abortion, and they were so pro-life, even if someone had I maybe I won't go into any details, but they were just incredibly pro-life, to the point where I was, there it was just I won't talk about it for fear of triggering anybody. But and I just sat there and listened to them because I literally had no idea what to say. But somehow through like my not reacting to them, we ended up having a really good conversation at the end and agreeing on gun control of all things, and agreeing on the need to have these conversations where you listen to somebody else even if you disagree. And so just one more story from these early days. I was talking. So yeah, this was still in 2018. I went down to find this guy, and he was in his detached garage working on his snowmobiles with a bunch of friends. And at the moment, we were debating Medicaid expansion in Maine, which is something that I'm strongly for. And he came out of his garage and he was like, "Do you believe in Medicaid expansion?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And then he pointed like this and he was like, "You can go now." And I thought he meant you can go because I agree with you and we're all set. There's nothing left to talk about. But it took me a few seconds of reading his body language to realize he was like, "Get off my property. I don't want to talk to you anymore." And I was so taken aback. I was like, "Wait a second, what just happened? Can you explain to me where you're coming from? You don't have to vote for me. I'm just interested." And he started to talk about how he grew up in the house that he currently lives in with no electricity, no running water. He's worked so hard his whole life for everything that he has. And for him, that means that he buys his own health care, and he doesn't have publicly funded health care. And that's a huge piece of his identity. And I can understand that, I can relate to that. So all of that is to say that discovered this whole incredibly left behind territory of folks who are just as frustrated and left behind by our government as we all feel, but who have never had anyone take the time to listen to them because we come from different parties or have different beliefs. But almost always there was something that we had in common. And that kind of that was just so eye-opening to me and heartbreaking and inspiring. And so that was what we did in 2018. And in 2020 we had the opportunity to do it on a larger scale and run for state senate against the Senate minority leader, the highest ranking Republican in Maine. And the Senate districts are about 6 times bigger than our House districts, so they're much more comparable to different districts across the country. And so we decided to run for state Senate to take these tactics to another level and see if they could be done in a district that was more normally sized. And we won again, and now I serve in the state Senate, and I'll stop there. That was a long ramble.
It was really insightful, though, and really illustrative. I mean, one of my questions was sort of going to be like, what are your techniques on the door? Like, what do you think has kind of set you apart from other Dems? And so one of the things I heard was that you don't just talk to Dems. So there's already kind of a structural problem that you're swerving by, setting up your target audience to include folks who, aren't Dem voters. You also said something that I think is going to resonate with folks, that you didn't react, that there were moments when you were sort of given a lot of guff and maybe a lot of arguments. And it sounds like one of the keys, at least in one of your anecdotes, was you didn't react. And so I think also the listening piece of this, of kind of digging in, and ultimately you seem to be listening for, a moment where you can find common ground. That's a little that seems like a really vital piece of this too. And I'm wondering if you could maybe dig into the listening piece. Was that always easy for you, or is that something that you had to sort of train yourself to get better at? And like, what are your techniques there?
Yeah, the listening piece is whenever people ask me how we won, I always say listening and respect. I mean, I think it really is that simple at the core. I mean, we were talking to the right people. We had the best mailers and the best hand painted road signs, but it's all about canvassing. And so I think that was all about listening. I think in 2018, I was I felt like, like a cartoon where those gusts of wind just blow you back. That's what I felt like in 2018 with we had a governor's race. There was the immigration crisis, the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. I just felt bombarded every day by like very violent Republican rhetoric, and I genuinely didn't know how to interact with it. I'm not one to kind of go yell in people's faces. And I did find that listening could be an act of resistance, that finding that common ground with folks and building a relationship that could elect someone like me instead of elect someone like my opponent, who is he actually got elected when I ran for state senate and is the most hated man in the Maine legislature right now because he's insane. So having someone like me there instead of having someone like him there is really means a lot. And so if me listening to something that is really hard and trying to find that common ground and build a broader movement, is that worth it? In 2020, I think I took a little bit of a different approach, having been through it. I knocked about 5,000 doors myself in 2018, but ended up knocking over 13,000 doors in 2020. So I had a lot more kind of practice with it. And with the presidential race in 2020 and the Susan Collins race here in Maine as well, I lost patience a lot of times. I would often extract myself from conversations when people were talking about Black Lives Matters in ways that were incredibly racist, or talking about Sarah Gideon in ways that were extremely sexist. I just would extract myself from the conversation and be like, I'm not going to try and fight for your vote. I don't want it. I don't want it that badly. And I also kind of learned how to engage more substantively with folks on issues and talk about, hear where they were coming from on these really tough issues, but also kind of share my perspective of everything, and ended up having some better conversations that way. But I think in the end that almost nobody feels listened to by the government or government officials. And so the simple act of listening makes people feel represented, which is really, really valid and so important. So I think that I felt icky about listening at the beginning. It transitioned into feeling like it is what's needed in our democracy right now, that we're not going to be able to bridge these divides. We're not going to be able to elect good people in tough districts, which is essential at the moment, if we're not taking the time to listen to folks who disagree with us. And everyone's got to find their own way through that, though.
Yeah, that's really wise. Absolutely. So there's a lot of questions in the chat. I can pick them out for you and just do you prefer I ask them, or do you want to run through the chat?
Um, I I don't. You go for it. I don't.
I'll go for it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. So the first question you got is in flipping your district, what are the three most important lessons you learned doing that?
Um, I think lesson number one is don't rely on the Democrats, which I think is there's like a lot of privilege and ability built into what that means. Um, but unless you got a Democratic Party that's really kind of focusing on rural organizing, then it's going to be super tricky. I think another thing is creating your own canvassing universe, which is related to number one, but also vitally important. And I think number three is just always be talking to voters, always be canvassing, canvass until you can't canvass anymore.
Okay. Yeah, there are some questions later on about like the scale of your operation. How long does that take and so forth. But before we drill down into that, maybe um, what are you finding works now on the doors? What are your top canvassing topics at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm not canvassing right now because I'm not in an election year. Although if I run again next year, then I'll have to do it again. Um, I when I show up at a door, I don't say, "Hey, I'm Chloe. I'm running for state senate. Here's all the things that I care about. Do you care about them too?" That's not how I approach it. I don't have a script that I use. I'm not looking at my phone. I don't have a clipboard with me. I just show up and I'm like, "Hey, I'm Chloe. I'm running for state senate. Just wanted to see if there is anything on your mind this year," and then go from there. And so I really try and make it about whoever I'm talking to and their experience. I also, I've worked on other campaigns. I've volunteered for other campaigns. I know the drill. And as a, I think we're often trained as volunteers or canvassers to just to follow the script and to just like really ask the questions that feel super uncomfortable. I don't think I've ever followed a canvassing script that I've been given, and it really centers those script centers the candidate and the campaign, like just trying to extract data from whoever you're talking to instead of just approaching it. I mean, this is what deep canvassing is. It's approaching it as a conversation, and at the end, I'll usually say, "Thank you so much for taking the time. Can I count on your vote in November?" And then that's my only data point. They'll say yes or no, and then that's what GOTV is for. Then you get all your volunteers to come on GOTV weekend, do a few passes of your universe, and get those people to vote. Um, and I think it's also, for better or for worse, important that the candidate is doing the bulk of the canvassing as well, because it's just not the same when a volunteer goes and does it, unfortunately.
So you're gonna have to have a lot of energy.
Or a lot of something. I don't know if it's energy, but stubbornness. I don't know.
A lot of perseverance. Okay. So you kind of answered a question that was sort of on my mind too, which is this group of folks is they're not they're thinking a lot right now about issue canvassing and looking at ways to kind of like prepare the ground for a candidate sort of down the road. And it's
Oh no, I can't hear you, Scott.
Yeah, Scott, we lost your sound. Maybe try it. Unmuting and then muting again to see. I'm going to maximize time and ask you a different question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
While Scott is figuring out his sound. It wouldn't be a virtual training if Zoom didn't give us some kind of hiccups. So, Senator Maximum, let's see. What type of story did you use during the pro-choice discussion a few years ago, if you were part of that movement, is one question that we've gotten.
Yeah, I definitely depending on who I talk to, I might not share my story, but I think if I ended up in a conversation about choice, it's probably with a Republican or someone who's more pro-life, and what I say is that I think it's actually the most Republican thing to not tell other people what to do with their bodies, and it's a freedom of choice thing, and that resonates sometimes, or at least gets enough respect to kind of stop the conversation. And I think it's actually kind of interesting because I think the pro-choice conversation and the conversation around vaccination have really, they have a ton of overlap in my experience, especially when I'm talking with Democrats, and I often have some really interesting conversations with Democrats on these issues, but we don't necessarily have to get into that one.
Scott, is your audio back?
I think it is. I don't know who was pranking me there, but one of my kids maybe grabbed like their Bluetooth connected to my, so I was, anyway, I'm glad we didn't get their, whatever they're streaming on our microphone. So, Olga, did you have a second question? I should just go, okay. Just trying to find the, yeah, sorry, Senator Maxman. So, let's see.
I see one here that I could pick out if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. There's a lot of excitement here.
Awesome questions. There's one that just popped out from Susan about from being part of the county Democratic Club and how county parties can support candidates. That's an awesome question, because although I just said don't trust the Democrats, I meant the state party. In my races, at least, and in Maine, the county parties are unbelievably amazing, and I could not have won without them at all. They have such an in-depth understanding of our community. And, even though you're out, if you're running in more of a rural red place, you're trying to build relationships with all these new Republicans and independents, but you still need all the Democrats to turn out to vote. And that's where our local Democrats were just incredibly well organized. And I think, Susan, that's such an incredible service to provide to the community. Also, our county Democrats here, they organize all year round, off cycle, in cycle. They're just amazing, and they have they build up their volunteer base so that when the election comes around, they have the capacity to do an amazing GOTV. And we work really closely with them, coordinate with them, and they're amazing. So hats off to your hat as a county Democratic chair.
Okay. I do have one that's kind of gets into some of the technique of deep values canvassing, Senator Maxman, and it's, if you're working, let's see, when you have a really strong disagreement, how do you transition to it being a more positive conversation? Do you just keep asking questions, or do you have like a technique that possibly where you dive into like the person's personal story or how they feel, something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, for those who have canvassed before, there's a wide spectrum of reactions in general and a wide spectrum on the negative side of things. So, I mean, a few memories are coming to mind of pulling up into driveways with huge Trump flags and Trump signs, and people just being way too violent with their language and just swearing, and I'll just be like, I'm here to have a kind conversation with you, otherwise I'm going to leave. And I kind of get blunt with them, or if they're mean, I started saying in 2020, like, there's no need to be mean, how, like, shame on you for being mean, or something like that, just to kind of call out that behavior that I have grown to have no patience for. So there's that side of things. But I remember this one time last year when I was canvassing, and oftentimes these voters get multiple visits to their house, and it was near the election, and in the middle of COVID. And so this guy, I drove up his driveway, and he just came barreling at me, and he was like, "I can't stand another effing politician, can you just get out of here?" And I was like, and I was genuine, like, "I'm so sorry, like, I don't mean to be that person. I just want to hear what you're saying so I can best represent our community," and which is genuinely how I feel. And he calmed down and was like, "I'm sorry, I just can't stand all this stuff anymore. It's too much, it's too vile." And I was like, "I know, that's why I'm running, and it's hard for me to show you that I'm different, because I know that you see me as part of that establishment." I think that's something that I struggle with, is doing this work purely from a different place and from the good love of my heart. But people don't see that, when you're the fifth canvasser to come to their door that week, or when they have 20 mailers in their mailbox that day. So I think it's just being genuine, knowing where your boundaries are, that it's totally legitimate to put up those boundaries and to disengage from dangerous conversations, and also just respect that people, at least in rural places, people live in the middle of the woods for a reason. They don't want people to come visit them, and just having empathy for that.
Somebody found a squeaky toy, is that?
Yeah, I'm taking that away from her.
Okay, I'm going to try to condense some questions here, so you can get on with your evening, Senator Maxman. You said you knocked on 13,000 doors, right? So that's kind of mind-boggling. And I guess the questions can be summed up as, like, have you got any shortcuts for that? Like, and maybe it's in how you target a universe, in order to, like, I think the concern with deep values canvassing is it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. So folks who are going to start these kinds of programs really want to know that they're not wasting their time at the beginning. And I think one of the places where we think about cutting corners might be in our targeting universe. So I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to that or any other kind of techniques for making this more efficient overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the universe. When I started canvassing again in 2020, the state Senate caucus hadn't given us all of our data so that Canyon could make our universe. So I was using the universe that they thought I should use. And within like 2 hours of canvassing, I was like, this is the universe that's gonna make me lose. I was talking with so many Democrats who already supported me. They were so happy to see me. They all know who I am. I'm spending like all this time talking with folks who already support me and driving by houses who weren't listed in my van that day. That's a huge waste of my time as a candidate. But I think that's the perfect, at least in 2018 and to a large extent in 2020, that is where our volunteers felt most comfortable, was kind of talking to those Democrats who needed a little extra nudge to go out and vote, needed a little bit more information about the candidates, and kind of leave it up to the candidate on some level to go, or at least maybe this might be more me, but I didn't feel comfortable sending my volunteers to houses that had that gun sign that says, one day we're all going to meet the Lord, but trespassing will get you there faster. And then there's a gun pointing at you, and you're like, okay, I can't send anybody to these houses, but I can do this to myself. So yes, the universe. And we had the Senate caucus as well tell us that they don't canvass Republicans. And so it was really up to us and the genius of Canyon to create a universe. He predicted our win number within 400 votes out of 25,000 votes, which was pretty crazy. I think there's also small things that you can do when you're canvassing to kind of judge when a conversation is going to lead to a supportive ending, and you can kind of use body language and shorter sentences to get you out of there earlier, or the same thing with a conversation that isn't going anywhere. And I also kind of found, like, this is getting really nitty gritty, but I think in 2018 I had more time and would ask more questions of folks. I didn't have that luxury in 2020, and so I really just depended on people to tell me whatever they wanted to tell me. I would accept it and walk away and maybe not engage quite as much. And there's also little things I learned about, like how to drive my car, how to park in a driveway, where to have my pen and my palm card, so that I was flowing and going as fast as I possibly could. So I don't know. It is a trade-off.
Not a lot of shortcuts to this, and I think we see the value in it. It's really this kind of initial hesitancy of wanting to get it right. These are all really valuable insights. Can I ask you one last question? Do we have a second? Okay, so this also gets into maybe the details a little bit, but how do you normally pivot from somebody else's like oppositional position on issue X to your position? You've heard them, you've listened, you've respected their identity, you've thought about like why they care about what they care about, you've looked for common ground, but you still have an ask and you still want to get them to vote for you. What does that pivot look like for you most of the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there are, out of the thousands of conversations I've had, there are very few that led to no common ground, where I just could not do it at all. And so there's always something there, like I went to high school with their grandkids, or I live down the road, or they like my road signs, or they saw me in the paper, or someone wrote a letter to the editor that they know in the paper. There's always like some thread there. Or even if it's on issues, you can be pro-life, but also be for background checks. Or I think, a big thing in my community was that our sheriff here in Lincoln County is actually amazing, and really for police reform and drug sentencing reform, and just having a conversation about how these conversations need to be local and kind of respecting the knowledge and wisdom of what's in our community. And we also are a big hunting community. And so just kind of like, I can relate to all of that, and I understand all of that. And I think I use that as to follow that thread. Or if someone, I started saying last year, I hear a lot of anti-immigrant stuff that is really painful to hear. And, what I'll almost always say back is, I believe in a world where everyone has what they need to meet their basic needs and that we're not fighting over it. And almost everyone is like, oh yeah, you're like, me too. And so that's, so we just connected on a value there rather than connecting on this really charged policy and issue. I think that's, this is a bit of a tangent, but Kane and I actually just wrote a book on our campaigns and how to kind of like take these lessons and bring them to other communities. And so my head's kind of deep in this stuff, but we wrote a huge section on how it's kind of well documented how Democrats focus on wonky policy details and issue campaigns and white papers and platforms and all this stuff. And Republicans focus on values and, is this candidate like you or not? Could you invite this candidate over to your house and sit down at your kitchen table with them? And so I think I just kind of stumbled upon this in my conversations, but really focus on values in my conversation. So someone could be talking about, oh, Medicare for all, that's too expensive. I don't want to subsidize healthcare for everybody. But then I can say, yeah, I hear that. I think there's a lot of different models for how we fund healthcare, but I think especially in rural communities that everyone deserves access to healthcare. And then they'll be like, yeah, of course, or they might say, oh, all this feminism stuff, I don't know about that. But then you could be like, well, yeah, but I don't think men should get paid more than women. And they'll be like, yeah, that's true. So they're just ways that you can kind of get more fundamental with it, more human with it, that create that space for you to have a really good conversation. Say, can I count on your vote? And they'll say, most of the time, yeah, I'm leaning that way, or probably, or we'll see, which is I always take as a yes. So that space is always there. I think you just have to have like the patience to see through it. And I think it was really hard for me at first because my background has trained me to react really strongly to these kinds of ideas. And even when I'm in Augusta sometimes, and the other day we were there, and we had a couple really awful anti-transgender bills, and the Republicans are going off about how transgender girls shouldn't be able to play women's sports, and it's just the most awful thing. And I react, and I just vote Democrat all the way down because I can't stand kind of like validating their side of things. But then I remember my community and the promises that I've made and the promise to represent everybody in my community, not just the people who vote for me. And I get back to voting across party lines again. But, it's not easy. So you just got to do what you can do and hold on to your integrity as you do it.
Wow. What a great way to end, I think. I mean, I would love to keep going. I would love to just ask you everything. But this has been really, really special. And I think if I was gonna guess at the name of your book, I think it might be There's Always Space There, because I think that was a really good line. But I love the point about that acknowledging that it's hard and acknowledging that we're not really programmed for it, and that it takes practice, and you're living proof that it can be done. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing all that. You are very welcome to stay. There's plenty to do in the chat. Before you go, I'd love to give you the chance to plug your book by the title, if that's okay, because I think people would love to know about it.
Yeah, it's called Dirt Road Revival. It will be out in March 2022, and well, yeah, we're gonna be building it up and getting the word out. Published by Beacon Press, so final manuscript is going in after I get off this call tonight, which is exciting. But I also am just so grateful for all the work that y'all are doing and for you giving me this space. And I'll put my email in the chat. If I can ever do anything to support, please let me know.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Dirt Road Revival. I love it. That's a great one. And yeah, your email would be precious. And thank you again for coming. Have a good night and good luck with the book, and congrats on that manuscript. I know that feels good.
Oh my goodness. If we were in person, we would do a round of applause. So if anybody wants to react, I'm certainly feeling so much thankfulness for that incredible insight. Nothing like hearing from folks who are doing this directly to understand just how powerful this is, even if it is time consuming and difficult. So yes, thank you once again to Senator Maxwell. And I suppose we should keep going, y'all. It's 8:45, at least on the East Coast. So I'm gonna jump back into sharing my screen. Scott, I'm gonna warn you, I made a couple edits just for time's sake. But y'all, the next part of our agenda here is to give you an opportunity to actually practice writing your own script. But right before we jump into that, I wanted to take just one moment to talk about universes because it came up so much in the conversation that we were just having. So oftentimes, what you see in front of your screen, let me pause for a second. Can everyone see? Am I actually sharing my screen? Okay, good, good. So what you can see on your screen here, this is called the spectrum of allies. And we often think of people's political thinking and the way that they vote as being on a spectrum, a binary spectrum. Folks are either with us or they're against us. But what the spectrum of allies teaches us is that there's actually quite a bit of room in between. So you've got active allies, which is everyone in this room. That's people who are with our side and are actually taking action. Passive allies are folks who are on our side but don't take action. And then from there, we go to neutral, passive opposition, and active opposition. Two things to know. Number one, you'll notice that there are arrows that are moving towards the direction of active allies. People only move 1 point. The maximum that people can even move on this scale is 1 position in a conversation with you. And so when we think about that, some of our best universe of people to talk to are people who are passive allies. Because as organizers, our goal is to enlarge our active allies. That can mean talking to passive opposition, neutral opposition, sure, but we want to start with our low-hanging fruit. So the best conversations to have are folks who are closer to our side, but then and really leaving especially active opposition alone, just like Senator Maxwell talked about how if you hit somebody on the doors who is really truly opposed completely to the idea, letting go of that conversation and moving on to a different door or to a different phone call is absolutely fine to do because we want to save our energy for the conversations where we can make the most progress. So I wanted to just mention that momentarily. Now I'm going to keep us moving. If you have any questions, y'all throw them into the chat box. We'll have a little bit of time, but I don't want to lose a chance to give you all time to actually work through writing a script. So here on your screen, you have the 5 steps of a conversation. We've gone through these in so much detail in the last 3 weeks. Beginning the conversation or the introduction, empathetic listening, sharing your story and vision, reconciling conflicting views, and then the ask. And this is your time to practice actually writing your own script. So we have a scenario to talk about with all of you. And to do that, I'm going to hand it back to Scott.
Yeah, okay. So the scene, we're in a rural town. It's a little over 5,000 people. There is an upcoming nonpartisan general election for a seat on the city council. And you can imagine that this maybe is 6 months down the road, 8 months down the road. And you're particularly fired up about this election because the city council has consistently voted, usually by a 3-2 margin, against, in this case, protecting local water quality. And they voted against access to quality, affordable housing in your community. So you see that 3-2, and you know that if you can win this next seat on the next slide, then you can flip the whole city council. And so you've got an incumbent who's up for re-election. Thanks, Olga. And the incumbent was previously the chair of the town Republican committee. They're super well known in the community. And one of the things they're well known for is cutting public services, slashing the town budget, supporting privatization of the public schools, and opposing any sort of environmental controls or standards for local businesses. So that's the incumbent that you're trying to get out. The challenger is quite exciting. Moderate independent. She is currently president of the local rural housing organization. She's well liked by you all, by progressive residents, for positions like calling for action on climate change, being a leader on pollution control, endorsing an opt-in for federal funding for rural broadband, also supporting a local mask mandate as well. Mm-hmm. And you have a great chance because turnout for city council elections is historically low and candidates may win or lose a seat by less than 20 votes. I'll just point out that Senator Maxman on Wikipedia, it says that she only won her first election by 220 votes. Right? It was about 2% in our community, but it was only 220 votes. So every vote really mattered in her case. Okay, so the stakes are high. Here's your mission and your strategy. Write a nonpartisan script using deep canvassing conversations to increase voter turnout for the challenger. And at the same time, build support in your community for initiatives to either, and you could choose one of these two, clean up the local water supply or increase affordable housing in your town. A couple points. That second half of building support in your community, that's because this game doesn't end. If you do manage to get this person elected, you need to have their back. You need to keep the pressure up. You need to have built a solid foundation for these issues that's going to sustain beyond the election and continue to support and hold accountable that city council person, because you never know what sorts of pressures they're going to find once they're actually in office. So you're building support for the issue in your community, and that's quite vital to never forget that and only find yourself focusing on an election. Elections are important, but they're not everything. Okay, great. I'll hand it back to Olga for this slide, please.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Okay, so that is your mission, should you choose to accept it. And the way that we're going to do the breakout here is we're going to divide you into, don't worry about the first bullet. We're all going to work on the same issue just because we're running a little bit low on time here. We're going to break you up into groups of 5. And when you arrive to your small group, go ahead and introduce yourself and nominate someone who is tech comfortable to be the scribe. Scribes, you want to make a copy of the handout that we're about to post into the chat right now. And you'll have, essentially right now, you'll be working on writing a script associated with each parts of the conversation. Right now, focus on understanding the scenario and writing the introduction only. And we'll give you 10 minutes to get started on the introduction, and then we'll come back and give you a chance to work on the rest of it as well. Any questions about the activity before we go ahead and move into breakouts?
There's a question in the chat. Are we the person who's running?
Yeah, could I add something that might address that, Olga?
Please.
Okay, so it's a great question. I think I want to emphasize that probably the best way to think about this is that you're part of an indivisible group, or you're part of a group that's putting together a deep values canvas on an issue that is going to help a candidate win in the future. So you are collecting information, you are talking to voters, you are going to try and move them on the issue and get them to think about how much they care about clean water, why they care about clean water, that clean water is an issue that actually is more important to them than the last thing they heard on the news, or equally affordable housing is actually a deeply important issue to them, which maybe they hadn't sort of dug into with anybody. And so you're going to dig into that. And in one way, you're preparing the ground for this candidate that you know is going to be strong on this issue because, hey, she's actually president of the local rural housing council organization. So think of it that way rather than you're part of a campaign that's getting this person elected. I think that that's probably the more faithful to the Indivisible model rather than just I'm locking into being part of this campaign. But we do want that person to win, so prepare the ground for her down the road. Does that make sense, Olga? Is there anything, does that sound right?
That sounds right to me. Are there any other questions about the scenario? Especially if we didn't fully answer your question, Susan. While you all are thinking about it, I'm just going to show you what the handout looks like. I see many of you are in here. Hopefully you can still see my screen here. You've got instructions at the top. Again, we're not working through real life scenarios, so everybody has the same scenario. To make a copy, you just go to File and then Make a Copy here. So whoever is the scribe, feel free to make a copy of this and take notes. And then you can write your answers directly in here, y'all, for the introduction. And again, we're only working in the introduction for the first part. I'm going to scroll down just to show you that the details of the rural town scenario are here at the bottom. So if you didn't get it all written down from the PowerPoint, that's okay. You can reference this here at the bottom while you're in breakouts. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing. Rachel, are we ready for breakout time?
I think we.
Welcome back. Thank you for remembering the recording. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, here we are. 2 minutes to the end of the hour. You know, it's tradition now that we stay a little late. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I can certainly stay a little late. And we'd love to just open it up. How did it go? Were you able to get some of the empathetic questions written? Or the questions for the empathetic listening piece of the conversation? And were you also able to write your campaign message? If so, we'd love to hear it. Yeah, Sally.
Yeah, we threw around a lot of questions, but we like this one best. Are these, what's important to you about a local water quality? And if somebody says, well, the fishing, then you find something in common with that. And then from there we say, well, tell me more about that. And then what kinds of changes have you noticed? How do you think this might affect your grandkids? And what do you think would help to keep that water quality high for the grandkids? And then maybe when I was growing up, the water was like this, and I've noticed this.
Absolutely. Those are beautiful questions. You're tapping into the future there. You're tapping into their self-interest of what is the reason, what is the manner by which they use the water, whether it's fishing or anything like that, and then having a series of follow-up questions. Those were beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
What Sally said about the generations also resonated for our group. And but we were also thinking about a person who may be concerned about paying extra taxes or fees or anything like that. And we worked and we found this question for that scenario. What do you think can we do to affordably protect our wonderful water supply for ourselves and for our future generations? And we thought of a person who was also like, there's nothing wrong with my water's fine. And so we folded that all into this question. And it was really hard for us to keep it open-ended, but we finally did it.
And then that one's also about protecting in a way. I like the protection focus, because if somebody doesn't foresee it as being in danger now, you're kind of, you're really saying, how do we maintain what you have access to now for generations to come? Beautiful question, Melinda. Who else wants to share? Mary, yeah, go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I said I had a great group, and we got pretty far in the first session, so we had a chance to just chat and share about what's going on in our districts anyway. But one of the things I liked was including our own story, because you talked about that. So after our open-ended questions, where we would just say, you know, I'm here today to see what my neighbors are thinking about the water issues in our community, to kind of introduce how has your water quality been, and just follow up on their concerns. And if they don't have any concerns, have your neighbors had concerns? Have you heard about this in our community? Then once we've established saying, I can relate because my water has been a concern at my house, and talk a little bit about what I'm seeing, and then state the value. I would love to live in a world where we can all turn on a tap and get clean water, and see if we can get some agreement there that this is something we all want and would work for. And after we establish that there's a problem in the community, then say, we have a chance to make a difference in with this difficult problem. In our next election, we have a candidate who's interested in improving our water quality, and then introduce the candidate, give a website or information we might have to share. So that's where we went.
That was a whole conversation, Mary. That was so good. I think the only thing that I would say to level it up even more would be in step 3, where you were talking about the value. If it's possible, of course, the ideal there is for the canvasser then to take that statement on value and say, it sounds like that matters to you too, and pull a need from the earlier conversation like we had talked about.
Great. Yeah.
That's so good.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and just have us all here in the large room. And I think we can kind of continue to opening it up before anybody has to go here at the end of the hour. I'm just going to launch our exit poll here. And then maybe we can just take a couple minutes to wrap up, but then we can still answer questions if there are questions afterwards. Scott, do you want to say anything here in the wrap up section?
Yeah, well, thank you, Olga. Thank you to you. Very grateful for how you held this 4-part training series together. It's been a real treat working alongside you and learning from you. And I'm also super grateful to Trish and Rachel for what they did to put this together, and super just like continually impressed and inspired by not just the fact that like Indivisible showed up after 2017. I think that was kind of the easy part. It's now that there are still so many people that keep showing up and still recognize that we're needed and that there's a difference that we can make. And that's the numbers of folks who came to this and decided that this is what they wanted to spend some time learning about. And that's super motivating for me. And so I wanted to just express my gratitude to y'all for digging in and sticking with this. And this is, I think, the gold standard of changing people's minds, but it isn't easy. It isn't quick. And in today's world, easy and quick. And, you know, that's where the gravity kind of pulls, but you all are pulling back. And I really admire that. So thank you.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Thank you all so much for spending your Wednesday nights with us. And we're so excited for you to take on your deep canvassing operations in your community. And there's a bunch of ways to get support in doing this. So you can always contact your organizer to get support in getting started with a deep canvassing operation. You can always reach out to the training team with any questions, training@indivisible.org. You can absolutely reach the Rural Caucus, especially those of you who are in rural communities. I don't know if anyone here was not in a rural community, but the Rural Caucus is a great place to reach out and get support. And we really hope to hear from you about how it goes. And we really hope that that we change some minds on any number of issues that are important to us to make the world that we want to live in. Not to be overly dramatic about it. Okay, well then, I suppose we can just end on a couple. Are there any questions? Anything that's burning for folks? Yeah, go ahead, Rachel, please.
You want me to go ahead and end the polling and show people where we're at?
Oh yeah. Okay. So it looks like folks are pretty ready to participate in a deep canvassing effort, somewhat ready to organize your own, and somewhat ready to write your own deep canvassing script. That is beautiful. My piece of advice, and I got this piece of advice from a tango teacher because I also dance Argentine tango, and he once told me to get out on the dance floor before I felt ready. And so that is my advice to all of you, is even if you're not feeling completely and utterly ready, get out on the dance floor, get out into some deep canvassing conversations, because we know that absolutely practicing this, and the advice that we would give is if you can get onto a canvassing effort as a participant first, that's going to give you a lot of insight before you actually plan one on your own. Okay. I think, should we call it at that, y'all? I see some nods. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful night.
And everyone,
Night.
thank you.